At 4:47 on the morning of May 11, 1945, the stagnant, humid air near Dingolan Bay on the island of Luzon was thick with the scent of rotting vegetation and the salt spray of the Pacific. A deceptive stillness that masked the approach of 100 Japanese soldiers creeping through the dense jungle toward a lonely American outpost. Inside a small canvas tent, Private First Class John McKinney lay in a shallow, restless sleep. His body exhausted from years of combat, but his mind still attuned to the primitive rhythms of the woods, a sensory awareness he had developed decades earlier in the red clay and pine forests of Screven County, Georgia. McKinney was 24 years old, a sharecropper's son with only a third-grade education, a man whom the modern world might have overlooked if not for his terrifying mechanical efficiency with a rifle. By May 1945, the Philippine campaign had become a brutal war of attrition, a series of desperate struggles for mountain ridges and jungle supply routes where the Japanese 14th Area Army, under General Tomoyuki Yamashita, had retreated into the interior to wage a scorched earth defense that prioritized psychological trauma and suicidal defiance over tactical withdrawal. Company A of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division, had been tasked with guarding a crucial artery for American logistics, an assignment that placed them directly in the crosshairs of Sergeant Fukutaro Mori, a veteran Japanese infiltrator who had spent the previous 72 hours watching the American perimeter from the shadows, counting the minutes between guard shifts and identifying the exact moment when human alertness fails. Mori's plan was a masterpiece of night infiltration. His vanguard would slip past the outer sentries in the pre-dawn darkness, utilizing only swords and bayonets to eliminate the Americans silently, ensuring the main force could overrun the camp and capture the vital supplies before a single alarm could be raised. His first target was the man he had seen manning the machine gun all night, the man now sleeping just feet away from the perimeter's most vital defensive weapon. John McKinney had grown up in a world defined by the Great Depression, a world where hunger was a constant companion and a single missed shot with a .22 rifle meant his family went without meat for the night. Long before the army taught him how to lead a target, McKinney had learned to read the subtle deviations in the wind, the snap of a dry twig, and the way the forest goes silent when a predator is near. He didn't just shoot. He hunted with a cold, predatory patience that made his drill sergeants at Fort McPherson uneasy. They noticed that he drifted through the woods rather than walking, his eyes constantly scanning the environment with a depth of field that few men possessed. This primal survival instinct, forged in the poverty of the Georgia woods, was the only reason his head remained on his shoulders when Sergeant Mori threw open the tent flap at 4:51 a.m. In the absolute blackness of the tent, Mori brought his katana down in a powerful diagonal slash aimed at McKinney's neck, but in the cramped confines, the blade misjudged the distance by a fraction of an inch, catching the side of McKinney's head and severing the top half of his right ear. The searing pain and the spray of hot blood across the tent canvas acted like an electrical charge, bypassing McKinney's conscious thought and triggering a visceral survival response that had been honed over 24 years. As Mori raised the sword for a second, finishing strike, McKinney did not reach for his sidearm. He reached for his M1 Garand, swinging the heavy walnut stock like a club with the full force of his desperate rage. The rifle butt caught Mori under the chin, the impact shattering bone and sending the sergeant staggering back into the darkness. McKinney swung again, a crushing blow to the skull that silenced Mori forever, and as he stepped out of his tent into the gray, pre-dawn mist, he realized the nightmare had only just begun. The perimeter was crawling with shadows, and the distinctive crack of Arisaka rifles was already mixing with the heavier reports of M1 Garands as the main Japanese assault wave hit the camp. McKinney looked toward the machine gun position just 30 yards away and saw a tactical catastrophe unfolding. The 10-man Japanese vanguard had already swarmed the emplacement, bayoneted the replacement gunner, Private James Hendricks, and were now frantically trying to turn the weapon around to rake the American tents. If they succeeded, every man in Company A would be slaughtered in their sleeping bags. McKinney didn't wait for orders. He didn't look for cover, and he didn't hesitate. He charged. A single American soldier, his face a mask of blood from his severed ear, sprinting across 30 yards of open ground toward 10 armed enemies who had just captured the most important weapon in the sector. He shot the first man at 15 yards, the .30-06 round punching through the Japanese soldier's chest before he could even raise his rifle. He killed the second at 10 yards. By the time he reached the sandbag wall of the gun pit, he had fired 4 rounds, each one finding a lethal mark with the mechanical precision of a man culling a herd. He leaped him into the 8-by-6-foot enclosure, landing in a nest of 6 living enemies, and for the next 60 seconds, the gun pit became a slaughterhouse of point-blank execution. McKinney put his next 3 rounds into 3 different men at ranges measured in inches, and his final round took down a soldier lunging at him with a fixed bayonet. Then, the M1 Garand's bolt locked back with its iconic metallic ping, a sound that in any other context would signal the end of a soldier's life. The 3 remaining Japanese soldiers in the pit, recognizing the sound of an empty weapon, lunged forward to finish him, but McKinney reversed his grip on the rifle before the empty clip even hit the ground. He swung the 9-pound Garand like a wood axe, shattering the temple of the first man, crushing the forearm and skull of the second, and sidestepping a bayonet thrust to break the neck of the third with the steel butt plate. In 36 seconds, John McKinney had killed 10 men and reclaimed the machine gun, but the weapon's feed tray had been bent in the struggle, rendering it useless. He looked up from the broken gun to see the second wave of 20 Japanese soldiers emerging from the jungle, their bayonets glistening in the rising light. McKinney reached down, stripped a bandolier of ammunition from one of the men he had just killed, rounds the man had likely taken as a trophy from a previous engagement, and slammed a fresh clip into his Garand. He settled into the gun pit, resting his rifle on the sandbags, and began the 36-minute process of dismantling an entire infantry company. This was where the Georgia hunter truly took over, transforming the chaos of a jungle firefight into a clinical, rhythmic exercise in marksmanship. The M1 Garand is a semi-automatic masterpiece capable of rapid fire, but in the hands of McKinney, it was utilized as a sniper's tool. He did not fire wildly. He tracked each man individually, leading them across the open ground as if they were deer running through a Georgia thicket. 8 rounds. Ping. Reload. 8 rounds. Ping. The Japanese soldiers, who had expected to find their own men manning the machine gun, instead found a wall of fire that dropped the lead elements at 60 yards and methodically picked off the survivors as they scrambled for cover. Some of the attackers made it within 15 yards of the pit, their screams silenced by McKinney's rounds before they could even prime a grenade. The second wave broke and retreated toward the tree line, but they were immediately replaced by the hollow thump of knee mortars from the jungle. The Japanese had realized they were fighting a single, entrenched position and began to walk their mortar fire toward the gun pit with terrifying accuracy. Shrapnel sprayed the sandbags, and a Type 97 grenade landed just 3 feet from McKinney's boots. He didn't dive for cover. He reached out, grabbed the grenade, and hurled it back toward the muzzle flashes in the jungle, the subsequent explosion killing the very men who had thrown it. Understanding that the pit was becoming a death trap, McKinney utilized a tactic he had learned hunting coyotes. Never stay in one place long enough for the pack to find your angle. He grabbed his ammunition and moved 15 yards to a shallow depression in the earth, fired 8 rounds, then moved another 10 yards while the Japanese were still concentrating their fire on his previous position. The Japanese commanders, receiving reports of heavy fire from multiple locations, became convinced they were facing an entire American squad that was utilizing superior mobility to flank them. By now, the sky was light enough to see the true horror of the battlefield. McKinney had been fighting for 18 minutes. He had killed or wounded over 30 men. His uniform was a shredded mess of soot and gore, and the side of his head was a pulsing, raw wound. He spotted the Japanese commander gesturing toward the supply tents, an attempt to bypass the squad that had pinned them down and hit the camp from the southern approach. McKinney didn't hesitate. He climbed out of his crater and sprinted 40 yards to the supply area in 8 seconds, arriving just as a tactical column of 12 Japanese soldiers emerged from the foliage. Positioned behind a stack of ammunition crates, McKinney opened fire, dropping the first 3 men before they even registered his presence. The others, unable to find him in the shadows between the tents, fired blindly as McKinney picked them off with mechanical, rhythmic shots. The Japanese commander, now down to his last 20 men, committed his final reserve to a desperate split attack. one group from the south and one from the northeast, hoping to overwhelm the lone defender with simultaneous targets. McKinney engaged both with a speed that defied human reaction, firing 4 rounds south, then swinging his rifle to fire 4 rounds northeast. He was no longer a man, he was a biological machine of war, his mind entirely focused on the mechanics of reloading and the physics of the kill. But the Japanese were learning. They realized the fire was coming from a single source, and they transitioned from wave attacks to the coyote pack tactic, spreading out and leapfrogging forward to approach McKinney from multiple angles. At 31 minutes into the engagement, the Japanese were within 15 yards on both sides, and McKinney was down to his last 30 rounds. He realized the foxhole would soon become his grave, so he chose the only option left: absolute aggression. He burst out of the hole and charged the northeast group, shooting 2 men while on the run, smashing the face of a third with his rifle stock and driving the butt plate into the throat of a fourth. The 5th man turned to run, but McKinney shot him in the back at a distance of 3 yards. He spun around to face the southern group, who were now sprinting toward him with bayonets raised. He dropped 2 more with his final rounds, but then the M1 pinged empty again. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could reload. The first tackled him around the waist, the second stomped on his wounded head, and the third raised a bayonet for a final thrust. McKinney reached up, grabbed the ankle of the man on his head, and twisted with enough force to snap the bone, throwing the attacker off. He rolled, recovered his rifle, and swung it in a wide, desperate arc that caught the bayonet man across the temple, killing him instantly. He head-butted the man who had tackled him and finished him with a series of brutal blows from the rifle butt. At 33 minutes, John McKinney was standing alone in a sea of corpses, his hands slick with a mixture of his own blood and the blood of 40 men. He saw 2 more soldiers emerging from the trees and charged them with an empty rifle, the sheer, terrifying sight of the gore-covered American being enough to make the Japanese veterans hesitate. He clubbed both of them into the red dirt before they could even raise their rifles. Finally, he spotted the knee mortar crew that had been pounding the camp from the southwest. He found a loaded Garand on the ground near a fallen comrade and shot the 2-man crew from 45 yards away. At 36 minutes, the jungle finally went silent. When the reinforcements from the 2nd platoon finally reached the northeast flank, they found a scene that defied military logic. John McKinney was sitting on an ammunition crate, calmly pressing a blood-soaked bandage to the void where his ear had been, surrounded by a literal semicircle of death. The platoon sergeant ordered a body count, refusing to believe that 1 man had held the line. They counted 38 bodies in the immediate vicinity of the gun pit and 2 more near the mortar site. 40 confirmed kills in 36 minutes. The ballistic evidence was undeniable. The spent casings at each of McKinney's firing positions and the trajectory of the wounds proved that he had moved and shot with a speed that exceeded every training manual. The Army's intelligence team was sent to verify the engagement because the records of the Pacific's Audie Murphy seemed like propaganda, but their forensic analysis confirmed every detail of the sharecropper's account. On January 23, 1946, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around McKinney's neck, but the quiet man from Georgia wanted nothing to do with the fame. He returned to Scriven County and went back to the only life he understood: farming and hunting in the same woods that had saved his life on Luzon. He buried the memories of the years he lost and the 41 men he killed in the red clay, rarely speaking of the night he snapped and became the most efficient killer in the United States Army. For decades, his neighbors had no idea that the man down the road had saved an entire company in a 36-minute explosion of primal violence. The nightmares never fully left him, and his family would often hear him reaching for a rifle in his sleep, but John McKinney never sought pity and never asked for recognition. In 2017, the state of Georgia finally renamed a highway in his honor, a silent testament to a man who proved that when you take everything from a survivor, you're left with a predator who does not know how to lose. John McKinney died in 1997, taking the full depth of his psychological burden with him, but the record of May 11, 1945, remains the ultimate example of visceral impossibility in the history of human warfare. This specific engagement near Dingolan Bay stands as a stark contradiction to the sanitized version of military history often taught in schools. It was a 36-minute window where civilization collapsed and was replaced by the cold, mechanical efficiency of a man who had been pushed past the point of no return. To understand the magnitude of McKinney's feat, one must examine the logistics of the M1 Garand itself. The rifle holds an 8-round en-bloc clip of 30-soix ammunition. To kill 41 men in 36 minutes while under mortar fire and facing multiple hand-to-hand engagements requires a reloading cadence and a target acquisition speed that is statistically improbable for a human being. McKinney wasn't just firing, he was calculating windage, lead, and the physical location of invisible threats while blood loss from his severed ear threatened to induce shock. His actions represent the absolute ceiling of individual infantry performance. When the smoke cleared on that Luzon morning, the soldiers of Company A didn't see a hero from a recruitment poster. They saw a man who had become something unrecognizable to save them. The true monster of that battlefield wasn't an SS general or a high-ranking officer. It was a quiet sharecropper who had been forced to reclaim his predatory heritage to survive. McKinney's story is a reminder that the most powerful weapon on any battlefield isn't the tank or the airplane, but the individual who refuses to accept the mathematics of his own death. In the decades following the war, as the details of McKinney's service were declassified and verified by military historians, the comparison to Audie Murphy became standard, yet McKinney's story remained in the shadows, perhaps because the nature of his combat was so singular and so violent that it defied easy commodification. He was the phantom warrior of the 33rd Division, a man who lived the rest of his life in the same silence he had used to hunt squirrels as a boy. The road that now bears his name in Georgia is traveled by thousands of people every day who have no knowledge of the man with the missing ear or the 36 minutes that saved 100 lives. But for those of us who dig into the war files, the truth is unavoidable. John McKinney was the ultimate outlier, a man who looked at 100 enemies and decided that 41 of them had to die right then and there. His legacy is not one of glory, but of the cold, hard reality of what it takes to stand your ground when the world around you is screaming for your blood. As we analyze these files, we must always look past the grand narratives of the generals and find the men like McKinney, the sharecroppers, the hunters, and the silent sons of the soil who were the true architects of victory. Their stories are the ones that carry the weight of history, written in the red clay of Georgia and the black mud of Luzon. Every yard of territory gained in the Pacific was paid for in moments like these, where the boundary between man and machine vanished in a spray of .30-06 casings. John McKinney's 36 minutes were a defiance of fate, a refusal to be a victim, and a testament to the terrifying potential hidden within the most ordinary of men. He was the hunter who became the shield, the survivor who became the legend, and the man who proved that sometimes the only way to save 100 lives is to take 41 of them in 36 minutes. Thank you for diving into the archives with War Files. If you found this tactical breakdown of visceral impossibility compelling, ensure you are subscribed for our next report, where we will uncover the psychological collapse of the German High Command and the secret assassinations that nearly ended the war in 1944. This is War Files, where we don't just tell history, we analyze the blood in the bone of the greatest conflict in human history. Join our community to discuss the strategic implications of McKinney's stand and help us keep these memories from fading into the fog of time. Every like and every share is a victory for the truth. Goodbye for now.